Welcome to the Axial Podcast. Axial is an early-stage investment firm based in San Francisco. We partner with great founders and inventors investing in early-stage life science companies often when they are no more than an idea. Axial is fanatical about helping the rare inventor who is compelled to build their own enduring business.
Okay, we're recording. Okay, Daniel, I think we had a really pleasant conversation. Mainly me talking, so hopefully you're talking now. But great to have you just do a conversation here and talk more about, software and biotech. I really enjoyed the preprint you put out recently. And it resonated with me. And I think it resonates with a lot of folks. And so I think your message should get amplified more. And so hopefully this serves as a starting point for you becoming, more influential in biotech. But maybe you can just jump right into it and give people context on kind of your general perspective on software and biotech and statistics and reproducibility.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks for the invitation for this podcast interview. So I'm totally surprised somebody even found this preprint, and even more surprised that somebody wants to talk about it. So
it's really important. You don't know how important this is.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Super important. Science
really
is
cool.
Unreproducible.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's really cool. And so hope we're going to have an interesting conversation. And I mean, the topic, just to get to the point of the topic, I feel today, the way we do coding and programming and so on in statistics, and in particular in biostatistics, but I would say in any statistics kind of field, is still kind of underrated and kind of underappreciated and kind of neglected in some sense. I think people are still very much thinking like, oh, everybody can, program, everybody writes some R programs or Python programs, and they run and they produce some results, and then they're happy and they just stop there. And some people, of course, go a little bit further and they produce R packages or Python modules and more recently Julia packages, for example. But even those people, I think most of them don't really think about long-term sustainability of these software pieces, and also the correctness and kind of maintainability of those things. And that's why both in academia as well as in industry, many of these pieces then just die after some time, because person just moves on. Maybe somebody wrote something during the PhD, then they finish the PhD, then it just dies there. Or somebody writes a piece of software in the job, but then they change the role or something and it just dies there, right? And that's kind of a pity, because a lot of, let's say, knowledge is lost. A lot of, let's say, work is kind of not living any longer. Maybe somebody's actually using it, but that's not maintained anymore, so it would just not be usable anymore after some time. And I think that's kind of the problem that I'm still seeing now, and what we're trying to get a little bit more awareness on this topic, and hopefully kind of try towards changing this a little bit.
I have my own experiences in terms of why this is an issue. I think it's just incentives, but what do you think the maybe causes are of why maybe science isn't reproducible, especially biology, and then why the software is just poorly maintained? And then what are the solutions? Could it be better training? Or is it one person I really admire is a guy named Brad Chapman. He maintains a lot of open source packages in BioPython, and it has immense impact. So do we just need more Brads in the world? Where I think you pointed out in past presentations, you have this list of R packages that are really well maintained. Do we just need a better open source software for them?
Yeah, so I agree that incentives are let's say, one of the root causes, because especially in academia, of course, there's the incentive is to publish a paper, and whether the paper contains then methodology that's then actually easily to apply with this piece of software, that's another kind of question. And even though many journals nowadays ask for code to come as a supplemental material or to be referenced in the paper, usually it's enough to just have a little script, just an R script or Python script or whatever. It's not really reusable for, let's say, different applications very easily usually. So that's kind of one reason. I think the other reason is also education, because I have heard also from others and also from my own experience. I mean, while let's say quantitative science degrees like statistics or physics and so on, and similar ones, there is some element of computer science courses that you need to take and that people take, and of course people learn to program. But then it usually just stops there, I think. And in particular, when you then come back to your, let's say, core degree topic, then you don't really think about this anymore, and you don't think about unit tests, you don't think about code style or readability or code review, anything like that. That's kind of not really, I think, a topic so far in the education. So I think education is definitely a factor there, and that's also, I think, what could be potential kind of ways to improve this. I think it's a lot about education, and I think it will take time to change, let's say, curricula in universities, grad schools, and so on. But what we're trying, for example, is to bring this a little bit closer to the people with articles like this preprint, or we also have, of course, this working group which is called openstatsware.org. You can check it out. And we try to work together across companies and across institutions to kind of bring this message out there, make people aware of it, and then also, of course, also offer some kind of workshops and YouTube kind of webinar pieces to actually educate people how to do this. And of course, there is a lot of material out there, right? I mean, it's not like there's no material to learn about this stuff out there. There's a lot of material. But I think it's more like about the fact that people get aware of the issue and then actually start looking at this material, right?
I think a lot of people are too busy, and then if you're not rewarded for the work, like, why the hell if I publish a paper? It's not been hard enough to publish a paper. Why the hell am I going to also like make the data really nice and format the spreadsheet, like CSV file? Like, I'm done. I don't care about the future. And so, have you, on that point, you have way more experience than I do. Is it better in academia or is it better in industry in terms of like maintaining software packages, or are they about the same?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I think it's a bit different setting.
Because in industry, there's like a reward system. It's like, let's make sure this stuff is reproducible. Let's make sure the software is well maintained, because 20 years from now, this got a huge outcome on our drug trial.
Exactly. So I think there's that aspect for sure. And of course, let's say we have, especially let's say when it's more about clinical trial phase statistics, then of course we have often the objective then to submit these things also to FDA or EMA or the regulatory agencies. And of course we have to make sure that this stuff is actually reproducible and the software is good enough, right? And this is especially more coming now with the move towards open source languages in comparison to the past, where everything was more in proprietary systems. So we're shifting more from proprietary to open source, and therefore the focus is increasing in industry. I think probably at the moment, academia is lagging a little bit behind, maybe, and they don't have, let's say, the stakeholder objectives so much, right? So I think what I heard from academic co-authors also when we discussed about the paper and the conferences and so on, then it might even be more an issue. And it might even be more an issue there because you have this, again, PhDs finishing, postdocs finishing their work, and then it's kind of not really clear who inherits that. Whereas more and more in industry, I think you have these little groups and kind of, crystallization points of people coming together. And then even if one person would leave to another part of the organization, then it would still kind of carry on. Right?
Interesting. Maybe like some of the best practices will go, so often from academia to industry, IP and whatever talent, maybe like reproducibility best practices will go from industry to academia. So somehow like creating that channel, and academians usually resist industry, they're skeptical, but you have a really hardcore math background and like a really hardcore math background. How did you get into like statistics and in medicine? Like it seems like I have some friends who are like hardcore math people, like at Princeton and whatnot, and there's like social risk. You get judged for like doing something that like is seemingly lower. You know what I mean? Like, how did you, do hardcore math and then decide, hey, I want to do this. I want to work on these problems. I want to get out of the math matrix. There's social risk.
Maybe. Okay. So thanks. Good question. Maybe just to clarify a little bit. So I mean, I actually didn't study hardcore math. I would say I'd studied statistics with, let's say, of course, math, let's say, classes and stuff.
Okay.
And it's actually, a cool thing that this is actually possible in certain universities, that you can directly study statistics. So you don't have to have a math undergraduate and then only can specialize in statistics. And because of this, I had basically from the first year mandatory classes in other subjects where to apply this to, right? And I have always been interested, sorry for the grammar. I've always been interested in medicine. And that's why I enrolled basically for the medicine, let's say, application subject, right? So I had most of this time was math and statistics classes, and then of course there was some medicine classes from the beginning. And this kind of carried on bachelor, master. And then when I did my PhD, it was also in the biostats group. And I was also consulting with medical doctors and stuff. So it always kind of carried through, basically throughout the education part. And then, then it was kind of natural to think about joining, pharma, joining Roche after the PhD. But that's kind of, so it kind of was a natural path already, almost from the beginning.
Like, what was the origins of like the medical interest? Because also one thing, there's temptation when you're a stats, applied math major. The temptation is quant finance. How did you resist the hedge fund world, or their overtures to you, or maybe you're just supposed to?
I don't honestly. That's a very hard question. I think I don't know. Maybe I just had in high school or something when this kind of interest of forming. Maybe I just had very bad economics kind of teachers or something. But I was honestly never really into economics, anything like that. I mean, even though my mom was doing some stock trading, when this whole kind of thing started, end of the 90s and so on. But I was also not that much into that. So that was, I mean, the whole quant stuff was never really so interesting for me. On the other hand, I think I always enjoyed, biology a little bit. Well, chemistry, I was not too bad. Physics, I was pretty bad, so I was not so interested in that. So I think, I don't know, but that's kind of, on the other hand, I wasn't really considering becoming a medical doctor myself. But then I thought, cool, stats. On the one hand, you can apply to many different subjects. That's really cool. And on the other hand, you can also apply to medicine. And I thought, that's kind of a cool combination. So it's like, something very practical. You can help people a little bit, maybe in indirect ways. And on the other hand, I can use my math and my kind of programming interests. And so that's the reason, basically.
So you moved to Switzerland, you joined Roche. What really fascinated to me was like, Daniel worked at Roche for 4 years, joined Google for 2, or something like that, and then you're back at Roche. And so it's like it takes a lot of courage. It also takes like a lot of confidence to do that. To like leave a job, join something else. You know what I mean? Like, and so what was the initial experience at Roche, and then like what was the motivating factor to join Google for a while?
Right. Yeah. So that was really, really exciting. Let's say changes, I would say. Roche is a great company, and I'm still working for it, so I'm biased. But Google is also a great company. But so they're both great companies. But it's a completely different business environment, right? In Roche, you are kind of embedded in this multidisciplinary kind of I don't know, mosaic of like, different expertise, right?
Yeah.
So you're bumping always, into different kind of, I don't know, chemists, biologists, medical doctors, bioinformaticians, or whatever, or regulatory people, or safety science people. So it's very diverse, right? And of course, within that, you still have this data science or statistics, or like more like nerdy kind of people. They're working with data and working with code. Whereas on the other hand, in Google is much more, I felt is much more homogeneous. I mean, you just have only those nerdy people with physics, math, or computer science background, and some stats as well. So it's much more homogeneous. You have much. I feel in Google it's much more pre-selected group of people. So it's much more filtered down because they do so many interviews and they only let through very few, and so on. Whereas Roche, I feel, is a bit more, I don't know, bit more normal people. Not everybody is super crazy and super whatever intelligent. I mean, they're all intelligent people, of course, right? But it's
Yeah.
not like so pre-selected. I feel it feels like more normal. But what was the reason to go to Google? Honestly, I was headhunted on LinkedIn, so very normal thing. And then first I thought, well, I would just say no because I didn't even think about leaving Roche. But then, I also discussed with my wife, and then we said, hey, why don't give it a try, right? This is Google. I'm still not too old. I'm still quite young. Why not try it out, right? And then I thought, okay, I just tried out. So I tried it out, and I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed this technical expertise of everybody, and the kind of the whole kind of software engineering, totally different world, of course, in Google, right? Everybody doing this all the time. You have all the greatest and latest kind of continuous integration, continuous delivery systems available to you. Things are just running very quickly. You have this big mono repository of code, and everything just works very flawlessly, right? On the other hand, after some time, I noticed I'm not so much interested in the business as such. So I was working in advertisement there, and there was no real way to work more on healthcare stuff. So that's why I thought, okay, if I can combine a little bit both worlds, if I can do more software engineering stuff of some sorts in pharma, if I can maybe bring some of the skills that I learned and some of the tricks I learned in Google, if I can bring this back to pharma, that could be really cool. And that's why I came back.
Cool. And so like that's a pretty formative experience. You get to like see how the best software company, one of the best software companies in the world, like actually works. And then you go back to something maybe you're a little more passionate about in terms of like problems you're working on. What kind of how much of what Google does can be transferred to biotech, and maybe what can't be transferred? Maybe there's some stuff that big tech companies do in terms of like producing code and software products that just won't work because maybe biotech companies are too multidisciplinary. But what do you think could be transferred, and what do you think can't?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a lot that cannot be transferred. For example, I mean, basically Google is like a big, money-making machine in some sense. Of course, positively said, it's this big machine and connects, it connects advertisers and users, or you can also say it connects users and products via this magic machine in the middle. And of course, it's great tool, right? And of course, I'm still using it kind of every day. But that said, so because it's like the central machine, and it's basically software there, and so the software is the product, right? In Google, the software is the product,
Yeah.
right? And that's of course a complete different world than in Roche, because in Roche, the product is at least so far to 95% or 99% is not the software, is not the product, but the software is just a tool, like any other of the tools that we have to bring medicines and diagnostics to people, to patients. right? And to improve the life of the patients. So that's a kind of very different framing. So that's why many things cannot be transferred. On the other hand, again, I was working as a statistician within Google, so I wasn't like computer engineer or some software engineer, but I was working closely with software engineers, and I still remember in the first weeks, I learned a very hard way, kind of, how to write unit tests. Almost, I would not say the whole day, but I wrote a lot of unit tests, and I was very surprised about the level of rigor that my manager, who was doing the code review, was actually, insisting on. For example, if there was a comment and there was not a full stop at the end of the comment, then it was like a review comment, like, oh, you need to put a full stop at the end of the comment, right? Or things like naming of functions, or things like edge cases and unit tests and all of that stuff, all of the nitty-gritty details. Was kind of something really useful to learn and see how they're doing it, and to understand why it's so important. And I think a lot of that stuff can be transferred to other, let's say, other software domains, including statistics and pharma, right?
Makes sense. I think most scientists have never written a unit test, and industry and academia. So, like, I say, from your experience, maybe some of your peers, when pharma companies or biotech companies use software as a tool, how much consideration is there when you do some sort of statistical analysis, or build a script, or even build some sort of like bespoke package? How much do maybe the company care just about getting the result versus making something that's reusable? How much stuff have you done? How much work have you done that's been reused over time? Like, either it's like a workflow or some sort of software package.
Yeah.
And if I'm assuming not much, but maybe I'm totally off. And then if either way, like, how do you think that's a problem, reusability, or is there some sort of other lens to look through that, like, how do you make biotech companies value software more as a tool? Is it reusability, or is it something else?
Yeah, good question. I think it's also changing at the moment a little bit. That, I mean, I think there is more. It's coming more the valuation for the software piece and the whole kind of engineering piece, and I think it's coming mainly through the whole AI kind of. Sometimes I would say hype, but also applications. I mean, there are also some, let's say, on the ground applications that actually make a lot of sense, right? And I think that's kind of a driving factor that actually, let's say, also high-level management or senior management in biotech is more realizing that actually computation is actually super important. It's not just some random part, that we just have to do. And we see that, for example, also in Roche and Genentech and so on. So, but that said, I think. Sorry, what was the question? What was your question?
Like, maybe I had a two-part question, but like the first part was like, what's the lens to think about how to increase the value of software? Maybe AI is the lens. Maybe enough hype will get management and investors to say, hey, we should put more money into software. We should pay more attention. And that's at least that's happening in Silicon Valley, where most biotech companies have to have a computational angle, and that's probably flows up to pharma sooner rather than later. The other part of the question was more like actually building statistical models, building scripts, packages for drug developers.
Yes.
Like, how much is that just bespoke? Like, just you have to build something problem by problem. Like, for this clinical trial, we have to solve it, versus building a framework where, how do I say this?
Fully
unified framework for every trial.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, sorry. Okay, cool. So I think it is changing, and I think in the past, again, many things were using proprietary systems, and the sad thing was, I think every company kind of was reinventing the wheel. Every pharma company was reinventing the wheel to write kind of macros to run in those kind of proprietary systems. And then those were then also submitted to regulators and so on afterwards. Nowadays, we are much more shifting towards this open source languages, as mentioned before. And there, the great thing is also that companies start to work together on frameworks, right? So one keyword, for example, that to mention is pharmaverse. So pharma and then verse, like tidyverse, but pharmaverse. That's like a open source collaboration between different companies towards particularly kind of the whole kind of reporting. How do we actually report clinical trials kind of thing, right? How do we produce all of these tables and plots that we need for our submissions? And I think that's kind of great because we can share let's say the cost between companies. We can still make it very transparent to the public and to any stakeholders, including regulators and payers and patients, how we're actually analyzing the data. So that's actually much more transparent than in the past. And in addition to that, but let's say in addition to that, I think we still need to do some more improvements towards, let's say, stuff that's happening within the companies, more like on the exploratory analysis level, right? So when there's any kind of study reading out, any kind of preclinical experiments, how do we actually get from the raw kind of experiment data to the actual conclusions? I think there's probably still some way to improve, some leverage that we can improve, things like reproducibility, but also, simple things like code review, right? I mean, many cases, what we have seen, and not just me, but also others in other places, that many people just write a script with one person's writing the script, and it's not even really double checked that this is actually working correctly. Again, when we're in an exploratory context, right? Yeah. This is not really checked, and nobody's actually reviewing that, and maybe later nobody actually still remembers how was this actually done, and so on. So I think there's a lot of stuff we can improve there. Very simple things, nothing too like rocket science.
Yeah, where as software gets increasingly more valuable for pharma companies, they'll start investing in those best practices. It also seems like, back to your original point, like well-maintained open source packages, like somebody's gonna have to fund that. I think that's what big tech companies do pretty well. They fund open source development pretty substantially. Maybe pharma companies will have to step up and fill the gap, because otherwise you're just relying on the goodwill of people, and people are busy. So one point on this open source thing, though, from your experience, you build these macros and little scripts for a particular problem, and at least the last 5 years in particular in SF, there's been this proliferation of like SaaS and biotech. That's one way to put it. Analytics, ELNs, LIMS, and a few other things. What's been your experience, from, at least on the pharma side, of like interacting with open source tools versus maybe proprietary closed source software services? And like, what would be your preference as somebody in a big pharma company helping drug developers? And how do you make the trade-offs between something that's open source versus something that like you'll have to pay a subscription for, or maybe it's a little closed off, but maybe it's better convenience? One example is Viva. Viva is a dominant player for CRMs and Vault. So definitely closed source.
Yeah. Okay, great question. So I think there are definitely, let's say, products, and I will not mention any names, of course, but there are definitely products that, let's say, big pharma companies are licensing and using, because it wouldn't make any sense to develop that in-house, or trust open source solutions, or maybe there's not enough open source solutions for those kind of things. So that's definitely happening, and But on the other hand, I think as we are, let's say, if we think more specifically about statistics and data science in general, I would say, then what I have seen is that while there are interesting products out there that are closed source, proprietary, I think at least from the Roche side, I think and when I say Roche side, I mean of course that's in my department, and the usual disclaimers apply. But what I've been seeing is that we are more careful whether we are locking ourselves in another proprietary system. Again, we are coming from decades of using certain proprietary systems for that, right? And we actually want to get out of that. We want to get to an open source state. So that's why I think it's definitely, it will require even much more advantages of any kind of proprietary systems to really go there and use that. We even prefer, let's say, building stuff from the ground in the open source world if it's not yet existing, just because we don't want to be locked in anywhere, right? And because we want to have this transparency, right? And that's the other thing, right? I think we realize, and definitely pharma companies are starting to realize that open source doesn't mean it's free, right? Often you have to do a little bit different work, and you have to do things like checking that things are actually working as you want. There's nobody you can really call, of course, if something goes wrong, right? So you have to take certain responsibility yourself, evaluate the tools you're using, build certain trust, maybe build some testing suites and so on. But we are taking rather those steps than let's say going too much into proprietary statistics or data analysis solutions.
That makes sense. I was amazed you didn't know about Benchling. Like Benchling is like in my network, Benchling is a massive company, like on paper valuation. And I was like, you know about Benchling? That's incredible. So that kind of maybe reinforces that maybe, at least for scientific software, open source is definitely the default preference. And it is always gonna be something proprietary. But on this note, maybe to like get out of the biotech, just science in general for software. You think about some of the most successful scientific software packages, SAS, MATLAB, a few other things. Like, but there are open source equivalents. Like MATLAB, I use MATLAB. MATLAB was horrible, but Python's so much easier. But you still get stuck with MATLAB, and that gets like, why do you think proprietary scientific software exists in the first place? Convenience, some sort of way to certificate, like a lot of people are certified SAS people, versus R. I think R versus SAS, R is better. But SAS is huge. And so maybe just for scientific software in general, why do you think proprietary solutions exist? Is it do you think they help solve that reproducibility problem? Is there economically incentivized to build software that?
Yeah, that's okay. That's a big question. I mean, I would say
It's a
again,
tough question. I think
it's a good question.
My instinct would be like SAS exists because they make money, and so they're going to maintain their software really well. And that's the counter argument that there should be more proprietary software in biotech to solve this reproducibility problem. Because open source, would require large amounts, not large, but some amount of funding for pharma. So either or, I think.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I think we're seeing the increasing funding in the open source. It's currently not so much through, let's say, funding certain, let's say, I don't know, open source developers that are freely running around or something. It's more like by actually having contracts with developers that are kind of in-house in the pharma companies, and then they help build this stuff. But to come back to the original question, I think it's a cool question. I think so. As always, the world is not black and white, and I think it's great that there are also, let's say, proprietary solutions, and there are companies that are doing this for money. I think that's good. But I think we need to have both, and I think the question is also what are these let's say, products kind of serving, right? I think why it has developed over time, and I think we have both seen develop over time, right? We have these companies seen develop over time. We have seen open source languages developing more over time. I think it's maybe sometimes really the risk, let's say, profile that customers want to have, right? If you want to have the least risk solution, if you don't want to invest, let's say, variable amounts of money into developing stuff yourself, then probably buying something is much easier, right? You buy SAS or you buy MATLAB or buy anything else. That's much easier, and you can call somebody if there's a problem, right? On the other hand, if you are more into innovation, right, if you want to maybe use the latest and greatest methodology, if you are anyway having, developers in your maybe large organization, if you want to be more transparent, but on the other hand maybe take some risks, some calculated risks, then maybe you're better off with open source, right? So, and I think we will always see, let's say, biotech and pharma companies. They will always be both, right? So
I agree. I think it's a complicated subject in general, and just like software in general, open source is closed source, and there's room for both. But particularly for science, you would think a lot of it would be open source, just because of the ethos of science.
yes,
A lot of it, a lot of it's public. You would think most of the software in science would be public, but it's not. And it's a longer topic. Just I think MATLAB's a case study where like every person, at least in the US, every academic is trained with MATLAB, and then they carry that forward in their career. Versus they probably should be trained in Python. I think that's changing, and so maybe MATLAB's in trouble. But I agree. I think there's, it's going to be. I think it just depends on how pharma values software. And are they willing to at least put some money towards it? And if they don't,
I agree.
All this open source stuff deprecates. And I think it's changing. I think you're on the front line. You definitely see it changing, and I'm in back of the pack, and I'm definitely seeing it as well. One topic maybe on this point is, for software, particularly statistics, what kind of innovation is there on the statistical package side, maybe software in general, that gives pharma companies advantages? Are there, like, from your experience, like new statistical packages or techniques that have made a trial more efficient, that have increased the precision of a trial versus the past? And looking forward, how do you think statistics software can actually be not only just something that like helps with reproducibility, but actually gives you an advantage? Like as a drug developer, like it can help you be more efficient. I think if you know the answer more quickly, so you spend less money on a failure and spend more money on a success.
Yeah.
What kind of maybe anecdotes you have, or maybe technologies, methods you see, or software you see coming down the pipeline that can help the broader industry?
Yeah, very, very, very big questions.
Yeah.
But
I can start. I think one is this concept of digital twins. I think we discussed this as well. And it's kind of a black box. And I don't fully, maybe you can explain it to me. I don't fully understand it. And it's, the market leaders I've learned out in San Francisco. They have approval in Europe. And that's a kind of one example of like a statistical software product that could reduce the placebo arms of trials, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely seeing a lot of enthusiasm and activity in the space of dynamic borrowing of control arms, for reducing, as you mentioned, control arms in pivotal trials. And I think especially for that also, I think it's important that we have methodology developments and corresponding software kind of going hand in hand and being transparent, I think, for researchers. And then we're also working in that space. So, for example, PS Borrow 2, that's like an R package that we're developing actively in that space. We see definitely a lot of energy in the covariate adjustment space, which is basically very much close to the digital twin stuff. A lot of enthusiasm about that, and we're also actually with OpenStats, where we're also working in that space towards having, like, let's say, reliable solutions also in the open source domain. I think there's a lot. There's a lot that is kind of not maybe also so much related to the methodology as such, but there's also a lot that is related to the how we actually deliver the solutions, right? Of course, with the whole web-based developments in the last 2 decades, we're shifting from very like static kind of PDF documents to something more like web-based, and you can click around and you can explore the data. I think that's also super important for pharma companies, especially for the internal decision making and for the exploratory analysis. And I think that's again where I think open source is very, very strong in that. I think otherwise I think I'm a little bit not so optimistic at the moment about the whole LLM hype that is being performed. There's a lot, I think, that's maybe a bit too optimistic. On the other hand, again, for specific solutions, and actually also for software engineering as such, I think, of course, there's a huge potential for LLMs to help and make things actually better.
On this point. So I initially I was skeptical of these LLMs, but then once ChatGPT 3 came out and I started using it, and then I use Claude as well, it's like 2.5 or something, or is it 4? I forgot what version of it, but nevertheless, it's transformed the way I read patents. At least I read a lot of patents for diligence, and it's made my life so much easier. And if I'm having this small benefit, I can imagine, like, for people who deal with a lot of paperwork, actually like structured paperwork, patents, regulatory stuff, these LLMs probably add a lot of value.
Yes.
Like, on this point of overhype, I agree. A lot of it, like, I get pitched a lot of transformer models for biology. Oh, we're gonna train on this thing and make a prediction about drug targets, and it's like, probably not.
Good luck with that.
I don't like buy this whole transformer models for a particular vertical until I see some results. I think in combination with other things maybe, but not as a standalone platform.
Yes.
But there also are benefits. I mean, I can read like 100 patents a day and like know what they do. What's been your experience with Roche, maybe just personally, where you think these LLMs, maybe just a transformer model in general, can like add a lot of value?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, but I mean, I definitely see I see possible applications to make, again, coding faster and better, right? And that maybe can also be one small solution to maybe infuse those best practices, because maybe your LLM, when you're coding, maybe it can tell you, hey, Daniel, maybe you should add a test here, or maybe you should refactor this function a little bit like that, right? So it also can come in through that angle. Of course, I think we see a lot of internal activity, improving workflows, as you mentioned, right? Reducing the manual labor work, making more time for creative thinking. I think that's also great that LLMs can help with that, reducing the manual kind of boring work. And of course there are, let's say also activities with the early research, biology kind of domain and so on. But again, I think for that one, I'm personally thinking that there's just so much complexity in biology. I think we probably need to be very focused in what we're trying to achieve with what, and personally, I would be maybe more betting on like things like quantum computing in a few decades to really kind of be able to simulate biological processes maybe more reliably, or
Yeah.
very complex things that are happening in the chemistry space or biology space, rather than maybe LLMs. I think LLMs, again, are good for like text. That's what they're made for. And I think anything kind of text-based probably can help us with that. But there's many other things, right?
I think I think I agree with you in terms of like the complexity of biology and chemistry, and so you need just new forms of computing to get there. The counter argument I've heard is text represents the state of the world. Everything is in text, and so if you understand text, you understand the world, and that's the counter argument. And it comes from a lot of those people are from like that AI foundational. We'll see. I mean, in San Francisco, you should come to San Francisco. There's a whole AGI religion out here. It's crazy. Like certain parts of SF it's a religion in some ways. It's very interesting to see. But one little point, I think we've had portfolio companies use like LLMs to ask questions about their preclinical data, and none of it's been right, but it's been provocative. And so I think this transformer models for biology, maybe they don't give you right answers, but they give you non-consensus starting points where it's like, oh, I didn't consider this, and then you have to go and do the work yourself, versus it's not going to give you an answer that's relevant for the complexity of biology, but it might give you an interesting take. And that might be good enough, actually, because sometimes science, my experience, you're so stuck in what you learned. You're so stuck. It's like you're calcified in terms of like, oh, this gene only does this. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does something else. And so maybe LLMs help you kind of.
That could be, yes.
One of my old mentors, Gary, brilliant guy, and he had that kind of zaniness. He was always willing to like consider a nonsensical idea, and so maybe LLMs act as that like nonsensical scientist.
Yes.
That's been my experience using it. Like
that makes sense.
It's never been right, but it's been interesting. So okay, Yes. But one last point would be, in terms of GitHub Copilot. I've used it. I use Replit and GitHub Copilot, and it's like, man, coding it. I don't code for a living, but I was like, I just wrote some scripts with it. I'm like, this is so easy. Do you think all these LLMs for coding? I definitely that's like the first application that's worked. Do you think that can help software for science? Maybe that.
Yes, I think that can help.
Have you seen it in practice? Have you any examples, or maybe?
I have. Well, I had some tries. I'm not sure if it was GitHub Copilot or GPT-3 or something, where it was not so successful. But I guess I was like too greedy with the kind of tasks I gave it. So it didn't succeed on those ones. But I think as these things are getting better over time, and as we see more native integration into the IDEs and so on, I think we will see. As we see today when we type an email and things are being auto-completed, and most of the time actually it makes sense and you just accept it. I think we will see that, right? And actually coming back maybe to the basic things, right? But I think as we are seeing that happening, I think it's even more important that statisticians and others learn about, how do we actually specify certain requirements for our software, and how do we actually encode that maybe in some basic tests, or at least can we tell the LLM to give us this and that kind of test, because that's kind of what we think is important to have, right? So I think maybe the LLM in the end can even write a program if we give it the corresponding requirements, and if we give it the kind of framework in terms of the test cases and so on, right? So maybe writing the actual code itself will be actually less important or less difficult in the future, will be much easier. But I think, in addition, on the flip side, that means things like best practices on more like the design and more like the high-level things about the software will become even more important.
I think especially for science, especially for a clinical trial, specifying the requirements like that could be life or death for some people. So you gotta like really like create the specifications up front and like know they're like correct. Because if not, like, bad things can happen. But, on that point of like best practices, so the group you're part of or leading, OpenStatsWare, right? OpenStatsWare.org. I will put in the link and then we'll promote it. Hopefully more people need to join it. I'm also always admire people who maintain R packages. I had a friend in college, he's an economics major. His claim to fame was he took a lot of pride in it. He didn't get paid for it though. He maintained the most used economic R package in the world. And I would hang out with him. Hey, what are you doing this weekend? I gotta freaking code up my R package. I gotta do some work on it. And it's like, do you make money? So shout out to all the R people out there. I think they do it for street cred. I don't know your experience. Why do you think people maintain open source code, especially R? Is it just for the like the glory of it, or like the respect, or that's what it seems like.
Well, I think it depends. I think there is definitely this enthusiasts, and that's great. I guess as long as you maybe don't have a family yet, you can do those kind of things.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I'm doing it as part of the job, so I think again that's where it comes to pharma companies investing in this kind of activities, and of course, R in particular has a very important academic, let's say, core team, right? That is really maintaining the inside of R and all of the C libraries that are sitting underneath and how that is linked to our interface and so on. So in that sense, I think it's relatively solid, and I think it will stay around for a while, I think. But other things are also getting interesting. Like Julia, for example, is also really cool stuff.
Yeah, Julia. I remember Julia came out like 10 years ago, or 2011, 2010 or something. I remember that. Julia was really cool because it had like Python, elements of Python, but then the power of R in terms of graphics, or like the power of C. Julia was like Python.
Speed. Yeah.
It was a kind of hybrid. Okay, I'm happy that Julia's taken off. I hadn't heard about it for like a long. I think it's not as widely used as R or Python.
No. It's very niche at the moment still. Yeah.
I always thought Julia was cool. I used to play around with it when it was we were playing around with Lisp. I couldn't learn Lisp. I don't know. I used to have a hobby of learning new programming languages, and Lisp was so hard. A lot of coding, from my experience, it's about bragging rights. A lot of it is just bragging rights. Like, I know how to code this up. I know this language. You don't, right? A lot of it is. That's what it feels like, and that was my experience of like existing on the fringes of coding. You're just. I don't know if I was on Hacker News. I don't know if you explore Hacker News too often. You don't.
No.
You should.
I don't know about it.
Hacker News. I don't know. I'll DM it to you. But
good.
Yeah, Hacker News. Yeah. Hacker News it used to be really cool 10 years. It's like a Reddit for engineers.
Okay, cool. It
used to be really cool 10 years ago, and it's kind of deprecated because it got too big. But maybe it's not too big. You don't know about it. So
okay.
To grow. Hacker News is pretty good. They have some. I'm gonna. Let me stop this recording, and then we just talk offline. But Daniel, it's great talking. I think a lot of people are going to find this useful. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. It was fun.